The Wonder Drug. The Wonder Drug. Imagine the world in the late 1950s. A wave of post-war optimism is sweeping across the globe. Science is king, promising a future free from the ailments of the past. It's the era of the baby boom, a time of unprecedented growth and family building. But for millions of expectant mothers, this joyous time was shadowed by a debilitating condition, morning sickness. This wasn't just a minor inconvenience. For many, it was severe, leading to hospitalization, malnutrition, and immense distress. The medical world was desperate for a solution, a safe, gentle remedy that could ease this burden. And then, out of a German pharmaceutical company called Untold came what appeared to be a miracle. It was a drug called thalidomide. Initially developed as a sedative, the thalidomide seemed perfect. It was incredibly effective at calming the nerves and promoting sleep. But its true genius, everyone believed, was its remarkable safety. You see, with other sedatives of the era, like barbiturates, an overdose could be lethal. Scientists, however, found it was practically impossible to find a lethal dose of thalidomide in animal tests. It was hailed as a breakthrough, a tranquilizer so safe you could leave it by the bedside without a worry. Soon, another incredible property was discovered. It was exceptionally effective at combating nausea. The perfect storm was brewing. A drug that was seemingly harmless and powerfully effective against morning sickness. It was a marketer's dream. The wonder drug swept across the globe. In the United Kingdom, Germany, Canada, Australia, and over 40 other countries, it became an over-the-counter staple. It was marketed under dozens of brand names like Defied and Contergan, advertised directly to the public as the go-to cure for everything from a headache to insomnia to, most critically, the nausea of pregnancy. Doctors prescribed it enthusiastically, and pregnant women embraced it, finding profound relief. The profits were astronomical. The only major market left to conquer was the biggest prize of all, the United States. Enter the William S. Merrill Company, a major American drug manufacturer. They licensed the thalidomide for distribution in the U.S., renaming it Kevadon. They saw a billion-dollar opportunity and were eager to get it onto pharmacy shelves as quickly as possible. In September of 1960, they submitted their new drug application to the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA. It was a massive file, over 3,000 pages long, filled with testimonials and data they believed proved the drug's undeniable safety and efficacy. By all accounts, this should have been a slam dunk. The drug was already a blockbuster success internationally. The pressure to approve it was immense. The application landed on the desk of a brand new medical officer, someone who had been on the job for just 1 month. Her name was Dr. Frances Oldham Kelsey. This wasn't supposed to be a historic moment. It was a routine assignment, her very first one. Kelsey was a pharmacologist and a physician, a rare combination of credentials that gave her a deep understanding of how drugs actually work inside the human body. She was meticulous, cautious, and deeply committed to the scientific method. As she began to sift through the mountain of paperwork for Kevadon, the corporate confidence and international hype began to fade, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The application, while large, felt thin. It was full of glowing anecdotes from doctors, but lacked the hard, controlled scientific studies she expected. It felt more like a sales pitch than a rigorous scientific dossier. She noticed glaring omissions. There was little to no data on whether the drug was absorbed into the bloodstream, or how the body metabolized and excreted it. How could you declare a drug safe if you didn't even know where it went or how long it stayed in the body? Then she found something that stopped her cold. Buried in the data was a letter from a clinician, published in the British Medical Journal. It was a small report, easily missed, but it mentioned that some patients taking the drug for long periods had developed a painful tingling in their fingers and toes. The condition was called peripheral neuritis, nerve damage in the extremities. This was a massive red flag. A supposedly harmless sedative was causing neurological damage in adults. The company had dismissed these reports as insignificant, but for Kelsey, it was a critical piece of the puzzle. If this drug was powerful enough to damage the fully developed nerves of an adult, she wondered, what on earth could it do to the rapidly forming nervous system of a fetus? It was a question no one else seemed to be asking. The company had provided zero data on whether the drug could cross the placental barrier and reach the developing baby. They had simply assumed it couldn't. For Dr. Kelsey, assumption wasn't good enough. The science was incomplete. The safety was unproven. Against the tide of international opinion and immense corporate expectation, she did her job. She deemed the application incomplete and, following standard procedure, put a 60-day hold on it, requesting more data. She had no idea she had just fired the first shot in a war that would define her life and save a generation. Block 2. Stubborn resistance. The William S. Merrill Company was not accustomed to being told no. They were a corporate giant, a powerhouse in the pharmaceutical industry. When they received Dr. Kelsey's request for more information, they likely saw it as a minor bureaucratic hurdle, a bit of administrative red tape to be quickly snipped. They sent back responses that were dismissive and superficial, essentially patting her on the head and assuring her that the drug was perfectly safe, as proven by its widespread use across the world. They completely underestimated the woman they were dealing with. Frances Kelsey was not a rubber stamp. She was a scientist. She reviewed their inadequate answers, found them wanting, and did her job again. She renewed the hold, resetting the 60-day clock. This is when the company's frustration began to boil over into outright aggression. The pressure campaign began in earnest. Executives for Merrill started calling Kelsey relentlessly. The calls were condescending, then demanding, then openly hostile. They couldn't understand why this one single reviewer was holding up a drug that was making them a fortune everywhere else. They saw her not as a diligent public servant upholding safety standards, but as an obstacle to profit. Behind her back, and sometimes to her superiors, they began using a label they hoped would discredit her, a label that perfectly captured their arrogant dismissal of her scientific concerns. They called her a stupid, stubborn, unreasonable bureaucrat. They tried to paint her as a pedantic paper pusher, someone who was needlessly delaying a miracle drug out of sheer obstinance. When the personal attacks and phone calls didn't work, they went over her head. Merrill's lobbyists and top executives began pressuring Kelsey's bosses at the FDA, trying to find someone, anyone, who would overrule her decision. They complained about her nitpicking and her unreasonable demands for actual scientific evidence. The message was clear: get this woman in line or get her out of the way. Yet Kelsey's superiors, to their immense credit, stood by her. They trusted her judgment and backed her methodical approach. The stalemate continued. Every time Merrill sent a package of incomplete or irrelevant information, Kelsey would meticulously document its deficiencies and send it back, resetting the clock once more. This cycle of application, rejection, and pressure repeated itself not once or twice, but over 7 times. For more than a year, this quiet, determined scientist single-handedly held the line against a corporate behemoth. But the company had another, more insidious strategy already in play. Even without formal FDA approval, Merrill had launched a massive investigational trial. This was a thinly veiled marketing scheme. They distributed over 2.5 million thalidomide tablets for free to more than 1,200 doctors across the United States. These doctors, in turn, gave the pills to an estimated 20,000 patients, including hundreds of pregnant women. The goal was twofold. First, it would create a groundswell of demand. Doctors and patients who found the drug effective would begin clamoring for its official release, putting even more public pressure on the FDA. Second, it was a cynical gamble. They were so confident in the drug's safety that they were willing to conduct a widespread, uncontrolled experiment on the American public to prove their point. This put Kelsey in an almost impossible position. She was now getting letters and calls not just from the company, but from doctors who insisted the drug was a godsend and couldn't understand the delay. She was fighting a war on two fronts, against the corporation's power and against the public perception they had engineered. All the while, her scientific conviction only grew stronger. She continued her research, digging into the peripheral neuritis side effect. The evidence was mounting that this was a real serious problem, and her core terrifying question remained unanswered. The company still had no proof that the drug was safe for a developing fetus. They had no data to counter her hypothesis that a substance that could damage adult nerve cells might wreak havoc on an embryo, whose entire body is essentially a rapidly growing nervous system. Her stubbornness was not bureaucratic. It was a profound act of scientific and moral integrity. She was refusing to gamble with the lives of unborn children. The pressure was immense. Her career was on the line. She was isolated, derided, and fighting against a seemingly unstoppable force. But she would not budge. Meanwhile, halfway around the world, in the hospitals and nurseries of Germany and Australia, a devastating medical mystery was beginning to unfold. A horror that would soon prove her stupid, stubborn unreasonableness was, in fact, an act of heroic foresight. Block 3. A generation saved, while Dr. Kelsey was locked in her year-long battle in a quiet Maryland office. A terrifying pattern was emerging in clinics across Europe and Australia. Doctors were witnessing a sudden, inexplicable spike in a type of birth defect so rare most had never seen it in their entire careers. Babies were being born with a condition called phocomelia, a Greek term meaning seal limbs. They had severely stunted or entirely absent arms and legs, with hands and feet often attached directly to the torso like flippers. Many also suffered from catastrophic internal injuries, blindness, deafness, and heart problems. It was a silent, horrifying epidemic. At first, no one could find the cause. Was it a new virus? Nuclear fallout? For months, physicians like Dr. Wittekind Lenz in Germany and Dr. William McBride in Australia frantically searched for a common thread connecting these devastated families. Then, in late 1961, they found it. The one thing these mothers had in common was that they had all taken a popular, supposedly harmless drug for morning sickness early in their pregnancies. That drug was thalidomide. The news broke like a thunderclap. The wonder drug was a teratogen, a monstrous agent of birth defects. The safe sedative was a poison of unimaginable cruelty. As the story spread, the drug was pulled from shelves in Germany and the United Kingdom. When the news reached the United States, the executives at the William S. Merrill Company could no longer bully, dismiss, or argue. The evidence Kelsey had demanded, the proof of what the drug could do to a fetus, was now on the front page of every newspaper in the world, written in the language of human tragedy. In March of 1962, the company quietly withdrew its application for Cavadon. The war was over. Kelsey had won. It wasn't until a few months later, in July 1962, that the American public learned just how close they had come to disaster. An investigative report in the Washington Post laid out the entire story. The immense pressure from Merrill, the company's dismissive attitude, and the unwavering refusal of a single FDA official to bend. The story, "Heroine of FDA Keeps Bad Drug Off Market," transformed Frances Kelsey overnight. The stupid, stubborn bureaucrat was revealed for what she truly was, a national hero. The public was horrified by the corporate greed and profoundly grateful for her integrity. While an estimated 10,000 children in 46 countries were born with thalidomide-related defects, the United States was largely spared. Thanks to the free sample program, about 17 affected babies were born in the U.S., a tragedy for those families, but a fraction of the catastrophe that would have occurred had the drug been approved. Dr. Kelsey's quiet, persistent no had saved a generation of American children. The fallout was swift and transformative. In August 1962, President John F. Kennedy presented Dr. Kelsey with the President's Award for Distinguished Federal Civilian Service, the highest honor for a government employee. At the ceremony, he praised her for her exceptional judgment in evaluating a new drug for safety for human use, which has prevented a great tragedy of birth deformities in the United States. But her greatest legacy was not the award. It was the fundamental change she inspired. The thalidomide crisis shocked the public and Congress into action. It exposed the gaping holes in America's drug laws. Spurred by the public outcry, Congress passed the landmark Kefauver-Harris drug amendments of 1962. This legislation revolutionized drug regulation. For the very first time, it required drug manufacturers to provide scientific proof that a new drug was not only safe, but also for its intended purpose. It mandated that the FDA oversee drug advertising and that clinical trial participants give informed consent. These protections, which we take for granted today, were forged in the fire of this crisis and built on the foundation of Dr. Kelsey's courage. Her stand set a new gold standard for drug safety that was adopted around the world. Frances Kelsey continued her work at the FDA for another 40 years, a quiet guardian of public health. Her story is the ultimate proof that one person, armed with integrity and a commitment to the truth, can stand against immense power and, in doing so, change the world. She was the hero we didn't know we needed, the stubborn bureaucrat who saved millions.